Good evening. What you're about to hear is the fourth and final installment in Genre Grinders' insanely long retrospective of shot-on-video horror movies. This was intended to be a 3-part series, but spread over into 4 parts. We also lost the original part 2 and had to re-record it. And then I got very, very sick and needed to stretch those episodes over the months of January and February, not releasing it all in January like I originally promised. I apologize for the lack of non-shot-on-video content for everyone listening to this podcast as it is released, especially those of you who don't give a shit about shot-on-video horror movies. I'm already prepping a completely new shot-on-video free episode for early March. Thank you for your patience. I hope what Patrick and I made is something people enjoyed, and I'll see you on the other side.
Next one is another film by Todd Sheets, Bimbos BC from 1990. It's their first film of the 90s. It's a no-budget, goofy, violent fantasy movie. Apparently it's based on a comic book, but he certainly didn't pay for the rights to it because he didn't pay for anything. I didn't get a chance to see it, but I did see screen caps from it, and there's like an evil wizard's lair that is clearly just a public library, like where there's just bookshelves behind him and stuff. It seems like this is just sort of a dopey comedy, and it's only really a horror adjacent at all because it's like super violent in the way that a Todd Sheets movie is. Attack of the Hidiopoid from 1990 from Rick Werner Farr. Filmed in Washington around Seattle during the grunge era. This is absolutely the year you would want to see a shot-on-video horror movie from Seattle, but unfortunately it's very hard to find. So I don't know many more details than that. There aren't a lot of reviews of it, but that's exactly the sort of thing that's like, yeah, that would be pretty good to capture that feeling. But maybe one day. Bleeding Skull, please release a videotape that you and your 75 friends who have VCRs can buy. Dark Romances, Volume 1 from 1990, directed by Mark Shepard. Now, this movie is awesome.
I totally forgot to watch this. I'm so sorry. So
I sent you a clip. I
know, and I forgot.
I specifically, all you have to do, you have to watch this 5-minute stretch to get an idea of the aesthetic. So Mark Shepard is the guy who is the cinematographer for Cards of Death, which we talked about on the first episode. And Dark Romances Volume 1 sort of belies the fact that this isn't a feature film. I want to say this was more an intended video series where it was like, there's no framing device, there's no through line, there's no host that is connected in these stories. It is just, here's the opening credits for one story, here's the closing credits, then here's the second story, opening, closing. So you can imagine, in a video market where this was never intended to be a feature film of any kind, that this was just sort of like, hey, what if we released a tape series where we did these sort of anthology horror stories that were sort of dark romantic twists on the old EC Comics kind of plots, and they don't look like each other. I think I think they might even be directed by different people, or written by different people. I think maybe Mark Shepard directed both these. And there is a Volume 2, which I didn't get a chance to see, but it is so cool looking. The room in Cards of Death where the card game happens, if you extend that out to the entire movie, that's what this movie is. And very different, too. So the first story, it takes place in 19th century France, literally at the Grand Guignol Theater, and it's this sort of story within a story. It's that classic, 19th century short fiction, or I guess early 20th century short fiction approach where there is a character who is in an insane asylum, and they're being interviewed how they got there, and then they tell this story about being in Paris, and everything is extremely fancy, and it's a lot of lace and frills and stuff, but the look of it is all the most high-pitched neon colors that you've ever seen in your life. The best thing I could use to explain to it is Guy Madden. If you've ever seen a Guy Madden movie, Guy Madden does these movies that kind of feel like throwbacks to silent films, but they're extremely over the top and they're extremely melodramatic, and the style is he's not trying to emulate silent films as much as he is trying to take a silent film aesthetic and then just sort of blow it up and hypercharge it. And this is that same thing, except it's all shot on video. It's not silent film, but it is that just same every single like there's tons of rapid editing like a Guy Madden movie, and every single shot it edits from is this like absolutely gorgeous, crazy looking thing. There's a candle, there's like candles everywhere that have the crazy star lens flare on them that we talked about in Cards of Death, that all the lights in that movie have. The first story is very hard to really discern what's happening because it is such a rapid fire bits of exposition and stories within stories where it's this woman. And again, like even that feels like a throwback to the short fiction of the late 19th, early 20th century, where it's like, I sat down with my friend and he told me a story about sitting down with his friend and his friend told him this story. Like that always seems to be the framing device of like an M.R. James or whatever.
Or like, isn't Frankenstein the story within a story?
Yeah. Frankenstein's that way as well.
Yeah.
A lot of Edgar Allan Poe short fiction is like that. So at a certain point you get kind of lost, but basically there's this woman who is in this semi-abusive relationship with the guy who runs the Grand Guignol. And I guess, actually, Gabe, I would ask you to explain what this theater was for our listeners.
Grand Guignol is sort of a theater of the absurd where they would set up sort of magic tricks that were gore. Like, so it would be a magic trick where you would do something extremely gory, and it was considered very transgressive at the time. And so basically the idea of gore in movies begins with Grand Guignol Theater. And so because of that, some early French horror movies are more gory than others because it was already kind of on their mind.
And like that's sort of a touchstone for like Herschel Gordon Lewis movies. Herschel Gordon Lewis, like
Wizard of
all
Gore.
The stuff in between the gore effects are just nonsense.
Wizard of Gore is basically a Grand Guignol in the 70s kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a setting for the really great Peter Lorre, I want to say 30s, it might be early 40s, horror film Mad Love as well. And so it is this woman in this 19th century Paris goes and she meets her friend who is an actress on stage at the Grand Guignol, and her friend is in this sort of abusive relationship with the guy who runs it, and there's all these scenes that take place on the stage, and you see all this like violent stuff happening in that. At one point, someone's face gets totally peeled off their head in a way that was like, wow, this movie is so artsy-fartsy. I did not expect them to go for it with the gore, but like they really know what they're doing. And then it turns out that her friend is maybe actually has a demon inside of her or something. There's this crazy exorcism scene happening at the very end. Basically, what I want to say with all of this, with the setting and with the approach and with the heightened aesthetics and the colors and everything, is that this is really art school-ass, art film-ass, arty art horror. It is like you watch it and you're like, this is very precious almost, except that it is really well done and really well paced, and they got actual actors to do everything, and it's just so dazzling, and there's no movie like this. Like when you think about we talked a little bit about this with Cards of Death, but like when you talk about the 80s, you talk about this sort of concept of the 80s, that it was all like smeared neon lights and big blaring synths and stuff. And most 80s movies are not that. Even most 80s shot on video movies are not that. That sort of idea of just like the 80s is this like total washed out pink and purple fucking dreamscape is just like not really any part of that culture. It's just sort of very tiny bits of it that have been expanded into a whole aesthetic, which is the whole vaporwave thing and all that. But like this movie is that. This movie is legitimately, you watch it and you're just like, if someone made this for Adult Swim today, it would be very hip, and it would be, I guess not today. If someone made this for Adult Swim 5 years ago, it would be, but at any rate, it's like very ahead of its time and very cool. And this is the first story. And the second story looks very different. It's also crazy looking, but it's very different. It's not quite as interesting because it's not just quite as grand and just kind of witchy and like, I don't know. I feel like if I was a like witchy goth teenager and I found Dark Romances Volume 1, I'd be so fucking pumped because it is just all that shit done to an extent that I don't ever think anyone else has ever done it. The second story is a more typical EC story where it's like this creepo photographer who like he mistreats all the models that he works with because he's just like, whatever, this is all lame. He hates himself. He's an alcoholic. And he's like, the only thing that gets him off is like really rough sex. And at a certain point, his girlfriend leaves him, so he goes to a bar, and then this girl picks him up, and she's like 16 or whatever, and she's like daring him basically to take her back to his place and take pictures of her. And then she has these crazy snake tattoos. I think it's a snake. It might be a butterfly. I forget the animal at this point, but she has like this crazy tattoo on her body. And then it turns out that, she is like a demon or a monster of some sort tied to something that he did earlier. And she's giving him his revenge. And it's also kind of crazy looking, and it's got a great mood and atmosphere. And it's more insufferable just because the lead is just like shitty male type that's not as fun to hang out with. But like it is still really cool looking, and it's more importantly, it's very different looking. It's a different approach. The color schemes are different. The stuff they're doing with the camera, the editing philosophy is very different. To the extent that like I really want to see Dark Romances Volume 2 and see what else Mark Shepard has in store. But Mark Shepard only ever made 3 movies, at least that are listed on IMDb. He was the director of photography for Cards of Death, and then he directed Dark Romances Volumes 1 and 2. And just from those 2 things that I've seen, I'm like, this guy is major sort of undiscovered talent. You never see him. I know Sub Rosa Video released a DVD of Dark Romances Volume 1, so it's not like totally obscure and unknown, but I feel like I never see the kind of people who I think would really enjoy this talking about it. Mm-hmm. So this to me was like the big discovery, whereas a lot of these movies, even the ones I really loved, I had people I follow on Letterboxd I've already heard them rave about them. This one I'd never heard of in my life and had no expectations going in, but was instantly just like bewitched by the absolutely crazy look. So I love Dark Romances Volume 1.
Good. Yeah, I feel bad I didn't watch it. I messed up.
Yeah, I'm telling you, go back to that timestamp I sent you.
I'll watch the whole thing, though. I like it.
Well, the thing about it is 100 minutes long.
Yeah.
Which we talk about these shot and video horror movies.
True.
They start to really feel their length at 80. And that first story in particular, it's so dazzling to look at that very quickly I realize. It's also, the thing is, when you have those extremely harsh colors, and you have the resolution of videotape, what you end up doing is, if you have a medium shot of someone, it's like a 50-50 shot that you can even read the expression on their face, let alone discern who's who. So I got lost in the story in that first segment. As much as I loved it, I got lost and I was like, okay, I'm ready for the next story. I've had my fill of the coolest looking colors I've ever seen in my life. So definitely at least watch that segment. But yeah, the whole thing is pretty cool. The next one is Gorgasm from 1990, directed by Hugh Gallagher. It takes place in video stores. There's a lot of nudity, not much gore. It's about a call girl who's a murderer, who she gets called places and she kills people. The guy who did this, he also did Gorerotica and Gore Whore. And I think in all 3 instances, the titles were much more sensational than the films themselves. Now, you saw Shreck, and somebody once told me that the world was going to roll me. No, this is a different Shreck. This is Shreck from 1990, directed by Carl Denham.
Yeah, CK.
Wait a second. Isn't Carl Denham the name of the character in King Kong?
Yes, and there's actually another. The cinematographer is Arch Stanton, which is the name on the grave in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Oh, so we've been had.
I think it's all the same guy using different pseudonyms from movies he liked. I'll try to be quick on this one. This one was kind of like a Polinas Brothers movie, but felt more like the people I actually hung out with when I was in high school, so it felt a little more personable to me. I should say, though, that I hung out with assholes. And And so
you'll love it if you like assholes.
Yeah, this was a thing in the 90s where in the 90s if teenagers would draw swastikas on shit or obsess over serial killers, it was because
Charles
they were being
Manson
edgy.
imagery was big for edge kids in the 90s.
Yeah, it hits different in 2020 than it did back then. Back then, these were friends who found out I was of Jewish heritage and started using the K slur around me. They had a friend. I never did this, so I was always uncomfortable with it. They had a friend who was Asian, and they'd use the C slur around him, and they'd use the F slur all the time, even though they were actually really surprisingly supportive of gay lifestyle. But this felt like it was made by them, and it's about some dirtbag kids who get together to celebrate something they call Shreck Day, which I was trying to remember his name, Maxwell von. It's supposed to be the day that a escaped Nazi doctor was discovered and then put to death, and they have this whole thing where if they do all of these. If they'll have a seance and they'll bring him back and he will go kill the kids that were mean to them at school, which this also plays different in a post-Columbine world. But what's interesting about it is that it actually feels like a parody of this kind of thing, because the first half is so mundane that it has, and you realize they aren't serious about this. So they do stuff like they pre-record themselves shooting a video thing of like a demon answering their things and leaving blank spots so that you can talk to the demon and the demon will talk back to you. And there's like a long sequence of one of the guys taking all of the pictures off his wall and replacing them with a kind of Christmas wreath swastika. And there's a scene of him silk screening shirts. Which they have their Shreck Day shirts that he wants to give to his friends.
This is not casual, is it?
No, but they're having, like, they set out folding tables with snacks, and then when they actually do it, it's not really an occult ceremony. It's a joke to them where they like hold hands and pretend to be an occult ceremony, and they try to bring back Shreck, and they like set up all this pseudo World War II stuff for him to embody. And then they go, well, that was cool. Well, what do you guys want to do now? And that's sort of the end of it. But unbeknownst to them, Shreck is brought back to life and tries to start killing them. So after that, it's a little less interesting. They clearly liked silent era horror. They named the character after the actor from Nosferatu. And they use tinting effects. So most of the nighttime outdoor scenes are tinted blue, like you would see in a silent horror movie.
I think it's worth noting, we've mentioned this a couple times in some of these other movies, but like anyone who thinks Kevin Williamson invented like meta, like horror nerds referencing horror movies in their movies, no, it was very prevalent all throughout the 80s and early 90s, especially in these kind of movies made by teenagers with no filter. Like people like to think of Scream as the ground zero for that sort of thing, but it really was something that was just existing in the culture for a while.
Yeah. The gore's not great, the violence isn't great, but it's kind of cool. He brings back ghosts to help him fight them. Most of the movie is them looking out the window and saying, "Oh shit, what's he doing now? Oh shit, what's he?" You know, a lot of it is that. And then they watch. The funniest part is they watch a mockumentary that the filmmakers themselves have made about this guy that has some genuinely funny lines in it, like when he's talking about how this guy was discovered and killed, and says life and death are ironically ironic, that's the kind of sense of humor they have. But then they also include real photography from Holocaust death camps, so it's like so
they're genuine shitheads. It's not like there's no argument to be made where it's like, oh, you see, this is taking down kids who act like this. Like, no.
I mean, and that's the thing, is that up until that and otherwise, it does feel like it's not necessarily taking them down, but kind of acknowledging that it's all just a joke to them, which I'd been around those guys, so it felt personal. It also had a cool soundtrack. It's credited to the synth score is credited to Eric Sum, and there's some sort of industrial goth metal songs from something called Hellhound, which was a really cool up and coming thing in the late 80s and 90s, like Ministry, and there's a Tucson band called Machines of Loving Grace. So,
yeah. 9 Inch Nails, Pretty Hate Machine was 1989. So yeah.
Yep. So it was better than I thought it was gonna be, but I don't know if I can.
Pretty big caveats.
If you
there.
used to hang out with dirtbags, maybe you'll like it as much as I did.
Fair enough. Attack of the Killer Refrigerator from 1990 is the next film, directed by Michael Savino. This is a very goofy, short horror comedy. It's got a lot of actual party footage where it's clear that someone just brought a video camera, pointed around a party there as these drunk kids at the party are like defrosting of the freezer. They're like the entire freezer is just a giant block of ice, and they're just chipping away at it, and ice is flying everywhere, and that's a not insignificant section of the movie. It's just this actual footage of kids at a party acting dumb or whatever. And then it's just like, and then we shot a very short thing where these two couples are sleeping in this apartment, and at some point in the night, all of them get up to go get something refrigerator, and the refrigerator eats them. And it's one of those things that you watch it and you're like, I can understand why someone would make this. I don't understand how I'm seeing this now. Like, how did this get out outside of just this friend group who made this?
Yeah.
I'm very, like Trash Cans of Terror, I'm very curious as to the history of this, and if anyone... this is a movie that got released on VHS in a commercial fashion in some sort. I've seen the VHS cover, and it is, like, it's one of those things where it's a professionally photo shoot cover of a character that's not in the movie.
Yeah.
Because it's a model, and there's like a word bubble coming out of her mouth. She's like, I've heard of cold cuts, but this is ridiculous, or something like that. So I want to know what absolutely shameless company put this out as if it was a full movie and then sold it to people, and then it was like, I actually got some college kids dicking around for 30 minutes.
It does say, very small print on this cover, it says Attack of the Killer Refrigerator and The Hook of Woodland Heights.
Oh, yes, that was a thing that would happen.
Seems like they stuck another short on there.
Sure.
But it is in very small print.
You would get a videotape, and it would have Hardware Wars, and it would have Godzilla versus Bambi, and it would have stuff like that. Okay, that makes more sense then. Honeymoon Murders from 1990, directed by Steve Postal. Not to be confused with Honeymoon Killers from 1970. This is about a couple on their honeymoon who get attacked by a monster. So... Not a lot to that one. King of the Vampire from 1991, directed by J.R. Bookwalter. This is one of the first shot-on-video movies I watched as well. It was on YouTube one night. At one point, I had a habit where I wanted to go to bed. What I would do is I would Google full movie 1991, or like just any given year, and then I would see what YouTube had for me, and then I would watch it until I got sleepy, and then I'd go to bed. And this is one of the ones where I watched it start to finish just because I was like, wow, this is actually pretty good. This is Bookwalter's sort of take on Martin. The story is about this kid who works the night shift at a convenience store who is a vampire, and his mom is a vampire too. And he doesn't want to be a vampire because he doesn't want to kill people, but she is sort of a ruthless terror and makes him kill people and bring them for their blood. And so there's almost like a Dead Alive thing where he's trying to keep the fact that his mother is a zombie a secret, and he's also trying to feed his mother, except that this came out before Dead Alive. So it's despite the fact that it is not at all ashamed of sort of referencing Martin. Literally, the main character lives on Martin Street. And there's a shot of... It's like the same shot of the fake vampire teeth falling out of his mouth from Martin happens in this as well. And in general, if you remember how the playground scene looks in Martin with all that fog, that is how the outside of his house looks all the time. Which brings me to the thing that really works about this movie, which is Bookwalter is a legitimate director who knows how to stage a scene. He knows where the characters should be, and he knows how to edit scenes together, and he knows how to light a scene. So the fact, even though this is a shot-on-video horror movie with a lot of very non-professional acting, and it's very clear it's a regional film, and it's very clear that no one involved has much experience. The lead actor is absolutely terrible. In fact, it still feels like it's made with a professional level of quality and by someone who understands how filmmaking works. And so it has this cool atmosphere too. Again, this is a movie that I saw the DVD version of, so I'm assuming the music is from the original release, but it's possible the music was added later for the late 90s DVD release. But actually, no, I think it was like 2007 was the DVD release of this. But at any rate, the music is cool, and there's this sort of ongoing storyline where he likes this girl, and, you know, he can't get too close because he's a vampire. The problem is that it's very inert dramatically. Once it sets up its premise, there's really nowhere for it to go. It just kind of hits that note over and over again. Whereas, like, George Romero really found a compelling structure to explore this character, even though it's not necessarily the most narrative of his films. Like, there is a arc to the movie Martin, which is not present at Kingdom of the Vampire. There's a cool scene where they trap a little girl, or not a little girl, it's a little boy and his mother, who have gone trick-or-treating, and they trap them in her house and murder them both, and it's kind of creepy in a way that, like, the scenes in Martin are kind of creepy. So this is a cool movie. It's also on YouTube if you want to check it out, though I think either Bookwalter or someone else remade it in 2006, I want to say. So if you search for Kingdom of the Vampire, even if you search for Kingdom of the Vampire 1991, a lot of things that have been posted to YouTube are actually the 2006 version, which I started watching the 2006 version being like, man, I really have no feel for this because this video looks incredible. I can't believe this was shot in 1991.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, it's a scene in a video store. Someone's walking by and there's a rack of DVDs. And I go, oh, okay. Never mind.
Yeah, Bookwalter's an interesting character because he made The Dead Next Door, which was, it took years and years to make. It's a zombie movie that's sort of an homage to Romero and Raimi. And Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell actually ended up doing dubbing on it because they thought it was cute.
I think Sam Raimi financed it in secret as well.
He helped him finish it, yes. And he it's noted as the most expensive 8mm movie ever shot. And Bookwalter actually contacted me when that came out on Blu-ray because I was still working at DVD Active, and so I follow him on Twitter because of it, because I reviewed the Blu-ray version of that. And he very recently, when I first started following him on Twitter, I think his Twitter handle said something like recovering filmmaker, and I can't remember what his job title was. And now, since that, which it must have made money, he's re-released his other movies like Robot Ninja and Ozone on Blu-ray. And just now, as we were preparing this, his video company was called Tempe Video. I assume he lived in Tempe, Arizona. They're now called Make Flicks, and they have something called the SOV 6-pack, which contains this movie, Kingdom of the Vampire, Chick Boxer, Galaxy of the Dinosaurs, Zombie Cop, Maximum Impact, and Humanoids of Atlantis, or From Atlantis. And they're all on Blu-ray, and it comes with 2 bonus CD tracks. And I guess he was autographing them, but those are all out, it seems. But there was just I thought it was nice, and I should advertise that for him. And I almost wanted to ask for a copy just for the sake of this, but I don't really know him, so hopefully he'll sell it.
You don't feel comfortable pulling favors yet?
Yeah, I don't know. Humanoids from Atlantis and Zombie Cop both sound like horror movies that I did not see on the lists of shot-on-video horror movies. So I obviously missed some. But these would be the original versions, obviously, since he's making a big deal about them being shot on video.
Oh, cool.
Perhaps they were shot on digital video, and that's the difference.
Maybe.
And that's why I hadn't noticed.
Also, I mean, if Wong Kar-wai can go back and fuck around with Chungking Express, nothing is sacred, Gabe.
Well, and The Dead Next Door is famous for existing in multiple cuts over a decade or something. So he's not above going back and changing things.
All right. Next one is Zombie 90, Extreme Pestilence from 1991, directed by Andreas Schnaz, who did Violent Shit.
And Violent Shit 2 and Violent Shit 3, which was subtitled Zombie Doom, not shot on video. This one I rewatched. Actually, I watched it for the first time. I had watched Zombie Doom. This is everything you want out of Schnoz. I would say watch this instead of Violent Shit 1. And then if you like what you see, maybe go back and check out the other ones. But it's sort of has homages to Rob Zombie. I think that the title Zombie 90 is supposed to be implying that this is an update or sequel to the Fulci movie, because he also made a Anthropophagus 2000 years later.
That's funny.
It's dopey. It's famous for being dubbed into English as a joke by the editor, I believe, and Schnoz thought it was so funny that he made it the preferred cut of the movie. And I think that's what actually ruins it, because it's that obnoxious. Did you ever see The Night of the Dawn of the Day of the blah blah blah? It's no. A bunch of unfunny people talking over Night of the Living Dead, and and it's that kind of thing where they have to be talking constantly and making jokes constantly and narrating what people are doing constantly. And I don't know. It says that the German track, you can hear the cast and crew laughing when they do the gore effects, and that sounds like more fun to me than listening to one guy do like 17 voices and sound effects with his mouth.
Yeah, it's real bad. I saw the first 10 minutes of this, and I had to tap out just because I hated the dubbing so much.
Yeah, so we'll move on.
Speaking of wanting to tap out, let's talk about Carl Sukenick.
This could
Alien Beast.
This could be a book. This could be its own
Alien
podcast.
Beast from 1991. Carl J. Sukenick's the director. This is the last stop. If you want to talk about the continuum of professionals using soap opera equipment to make the movies they would be making on film for cheaper as one end, and you want to talk about Mad Men with video equipment, sort of like unleashing their id onto tape on the other, this is the most insane. And Carl, and this one I don't have to what's the word? I don't have to speculate. Carl Sukenick has said that for him filmmaking is a way of dealing with mental illness. Like this is his sort of emotional outlet for whatever he has going on. I have not read enough interviews to know what the details of all that are, nor do I particularly need to. Mm-hmm. But like there is something going on with him, and these movies are his way of dealing with it, which cool. Except when you watch them, it is intermittently like it's either this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life, or this is because it's just so unlike anything else, or like this needs to end now. Mm-hmm. It opens on like a still frame and this like really crazy music during the opening credits, and then the first shot of the movie is like a 4-minute long shot of the front yard of a house, and there are like 4 people who do like a play fighting improvised fight scene in one uninterrupted cut. And like if you were a little kid playing Ninja Turtles or whatever, like this is, or Power Rangers or what have you, like, or Marvel movies now, I guess, like this is what you were doing. Like you were just sort of jumping up and doing like fake kicks, and then you would pretend to fall, and then you'd get back up, and then you'd fall, like, and like no one's coming within an inch of each other. And so, like, that's the kind of thing, like, there's shots of this movie that really test your patience. Most of the exposition is done over still frames where Carl Sukenick himself narrates in this very breathless, very manic sort of way, where, for example, this is a story about there's a military base of some sort, and there are aliens invading, trying to take over the military base and get the nukes or whatever. And the narration would be something along the... No. This is all done. This is all Coleman Francis style. This is all exists in the narration. The narration would be like, and the aliens came, and there was when the aliens they didn't know, so the aliens were there, and they dressed up like the military, and they came, and they were invading the base, and the base was there, and then that's and like, okay, so it's like heavy New York accent, that kind of run-on sentence, just like really nervous, like I have to get this off, I have to say what the story is, sort of energy, where you watch it and you're just sort of, there's something uncomfortable about it, and like this is, I don't know. I feel like if I was an art major, if I was someone who went to college and had these discussions already, I would feel more comfortable talking about outsider artists and stuff like that. Because I would have some kind of context for this, because outsider artists exist in every medium. Mm-hmm. But like for me, I'm very ambivalent about even using the term outsider artist, because I feel like all artists are working on levels that they don't quite understand themselves, and like I feel like it's very dismissive to call someone an outsider artist, because it's basically saying that they're not responsible for the art that they create. And so like I try not to think about art in those terms, but this is a movie that I can either watch it and speculate about Karl Sukenick's mental illness and about his home life and who these people are in relation to him and how they got there, how they ended up in this movie, why they are tolerating like scenes where he's just like he's doing the same voice, the same thing in the narration, except he's like the boss of the army, and there's all these people sitting in his living room, and he's telling me, all right, and then you gotta go and you gotta get your equipment, you gotta grab a bomb, and then he goes, okay, and then someone replies, okay, and then he very quickly sarcastically is like, okay, like he's mocking them. Like there's just this really raw nerve energy to it, and you're watching this and you can either like just sort of openly gawk at him, or you can try, and I try not to do that, because that seems like it's dehumanizing and demeaning, and like not a cool way to be an empathetic person, is to just sort of gawk at weird people. And then the other hand, it's like, well, I can't watch this movie and enjoy it on a even enjoying it as avant-garde. Like my patience is severely tested.
It's
so strange.
It feels like madness. Like it feels like. And there's uncomfortable scenes of topless women just trying on masks and costumes and stuff.
Yeah, there's unnerving stuff about it too. There's like this one elderly man there's this one close-up shot, and I think the implication he is watching things unfold via security cam footage.
Yeah.
But like periodically, without rhyme or reason, it will just cut to this one man watching everything, and it begins to take on like a kind of powerful negative energy. Like he just seems like this malevolent god.
Yeah.
like Bela Lugosi and Glen or Glenda or something. Like he's just like happy that all of this madness is occurring or something. So like in some ways you watch this and you're like, this is effective horror, in that there's an atmosphere and that there's an energy, and it's uncomfortable and it's exciting and it's tense in some ways. It's just in not any way that any traditional horror movie ever could be.
And it feels like it feels very childish too. Like you said, there's the fight scene, but it has this sort of the way that he keeps recycling his weird narration is like he was trying to edit the tape and kept on not rewinding it all the way, so then recorded over something else. It has that sort of feeling to it that it's like the tape itself. This is not the version we were supposed to even see. Like,
yeah.
It really is like, and it was like the things I made as a kid, where you'd sometimes accidentally record over the other epic dance scene or whatever that you recorded. You'd accidentally record over it and have to redo it. It's hard.
Or like this, or you are watching the start of this movie, and neither you nor Carl knows where the end of this movie is. Like there is this very free-flowing. You definitely don't get the idea that he sat down and wrote any kind of script or outline for the movie. It feels very stream of consciousness in a way. But the amazing thing about this movie is that in the end there are some crazy great special effects, which I think are actually taken from an earlier Karl Sukenick project. Apparently he's notorious for recycling footage and recycling special effects.
Yeah, it's like animated footage.
There's this total animated stop motion freak out. It kind of reminds me of the claymation stuff that happens at the end of Evil Dead. Mm-hmm. When the sunlight comes on the Necronomicon and everyone's on fire and bubbling and stuff. Like, it's, if you imagine the most rudimentary possible version of that. There's also like he shoots this flaming arrow at someone, and then I forget exactly how the effect is done, but it's done in like several edits in a way that show that he had some sort of foresight and like was able to stage a gore gag in a way that's like, well, you would not assume that this guy could has even the patience to stage a gore gag, but he does. And so there's moments of this where you're like, okay, he's doing it, he's doing the thing, but then there's so much more of it where it's like there's just this weird bubbling narrative of just like anxiety and sexual frustration and bad feelings that it's not dissimilar to Nick Millard in terms of the overall effect, but the approach is the opposite, where Nick Millard is this very low wattage hypnosis. This movie is like absolutely manic and upsetting. But I think worth seeing. I think worth, if you are someone who wants to know where the boundaries of cinema lie, this is one of them.
It's worth braving is like the better way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not a movie that I can say I loved or anything, but it is a movie that I like. There are moments of it that I was like, that was very effective, or this is doing something that no other movies can do.
Yeah.
So I definitely got something out of it. But also Carl Sukenick, it just seems like I don't think this is going to be. I don't think I'm going to become a scholar of Carl Sukenick.
No, he still makes movies with really offensive names.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about some of the names of the...
I just imagine that he probably believes certain right-wing conspiracy theories these days, just based on everything that's going on in this movie.
Hard to say, but I think this movie will do me. This is like one of those things where it's like the only reggae album you need is Bob Marley Legend, and that can do me. The only dip into Carl Sukenick's madness I need is this, and that my cup overfloweth.
Well, you also we talked about this. You need the Harder They Come soundtrack too.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, I guess that's the only reggae you need. But as opposed to like for me, Nick Millard is someone who I want to see all of his movies now, because I find his movies specifically captivating in an eminently repeatable way. This feels like okay, that's a something I'm glad I did, and I don't want to do it again. Speaking of returning to, let's return to Olaf Ittenbach with The Burning Moon from 1992. We talked a little bit about this when we were talking about Black Past. I think I like this less than Black Past just because I don't like anthology structures that are two stories. I've decided.
Yeah.
I think it
is a little weird.
The more stories, the better.
Yeah.
But like there's just this awkward pacing to a two-story anthology. And this even is more awkward because, again, this is another anthology where there's just a lot of time dedicated to the framing device, despite it being totally inconsequential. I do really like the image of the guy shooting heroin and then looking up at the moon and it's on fire. It made me think of Enter the Void. It's very Gaspar Noé.
Yeah, I'm sure Noé loved all these movies when he was growing up.
Oh man, Gaspar Noé fucking loves shot on video horror movies.
Yeah,
But I just especially that second story, I found it really hard to get into until the climax of it. First story, girl, madman escapes insane asylum, goes on killing rampage. Some absolutely wonderful effects, especially the guy who like just steps out of his car and then immediately gets nailed by the mental patient.
Yeah.
Just fantastic. At some point, he cuts off someone's head and then throws it. There's like a car honking at him, and he throws the head onto the car behind him. Really cool gags all throughout. This is not a movie that is short of inspiration in that department, but it's also just like killer going on a rampage. Killer going on a rampage. Okay, and then it's over. Like there's the thing about anthology structure is that the short segments allow you to have just a very nice, clear, well-defined character arc or something. Like when you tell an EC Comics style story, it's very easy and to get across in 6 pages. Like he was an asshole, and then the asshole got him, and then that's it. You know, like
ironic punishments.
And when you have these, then this is another movie that's a little on the longer side. I want to say it's like 95 minutes or something, not excruciatingly long or anything. But again, for a shot on video,
it's technically 98 minutes.
Okay, so like it's and when you have like one segment that's like 40 minutes long and there's not much of a story to it, it's just sort of the same thing happening over and over again. Even though the gore gags are great, it does sort of become a little tedious after a while. Second story is another serial kill. Honestly, I can't even remember. Like the second story for me is all about that climax.
Yeah, the second story is just like, it just keeps going, and to the point where there's times when you feel like they started another story, but you realize they haven't cut back to the heroin addict kid reading or telling bedtime stories to his little sister. It just keeps going. And honestly, I watched it even more recently than you, and I can't remember exactly what happens. It has to do with a brother killing two brothers in some sort of thing, and the one brother kills the other brother, and then years later the killer brother gets his comeuppance.
I think the problem is the first story has too little plot, and the second story has too much plot.
Yeah. but it ends with him getting sort of a vision of hell.
Yeah, it does.
In what I would describe as everybody wants this uncut version of Event Horizon with all the hell footage that is never going to happen because they lost it. This is their hell footage on a budget. that you would have seen at Event Horizon.
But you say on a budget, I feel like that implies that there's some sort of limitation to it. Like,
cinematography budget.
Yeah.
Like, there's no limitation to how nasty how much shit
This
happens.
doesn't look like a polished late 90s Paul W.S. Anderson movie, but like...
No.
It is so ambitious. It is clearly like the entire reason this movie exists is like, don't worry. Like Olaf is just telling himself like, look, I'm going to get to this sequence here. I already have all these gags planned. People aren't going to know what the fuck to do with themselves. They've never seen anything like it. And guess what? You have it. There's really nothing like this. It's nonstop.
It's the guy's basically he's tied down and dismantled is the quick way of describing it. By a guy who looks like, I don't know how many people even remember the longer cut of Return of the King, but the mouth of Sauron in Return of the King has this big grotesque mouth, but his eyes are covered by a helmet. He looks just like that. And I wouldn't be surprised if Peter Jackson based him on that or one of Peter Jackson's effects guys because they were all into gore movies.
Well, it's funny. I was about to say the only thing that feels similar to me is the climax of Dead Alive, where there's just gag after gag after gag of like the most, like every single one is way more over the top than the most violent thing you'd see in the average horror movie. Right. And it just keeps going. Like I mean, again, this predates Dead Alive. But I also appreciate this movie and Black Past both have a lot of male nudity.
They do.
This one in particular because the hell sequence involves him being dismantled full frontally, and when everything gets dismantled. But it's just like, it is so... The thing about Dead Alive is that Dead Alive, the climax feels like a bunch of Looney Tunes gags. Like, it feels like a bunch of jokes strung together in a way that they're like the way Duck Soup climax happens, you know? It's just instead of Groucho Marx shouting a one-liner, it's someone's skin being peeled off or whatever. But like, it still has the general feeling of a thing you've seen before, whereas this is just really unrelentingly nasty and mean and just like and realistic and just repulsive.
Nihilistic. Really nihilistic. The whole movie is super nihilistic.
Yeah.
It has a sort of, like, you get the feeling that, like York Buck Garrett's movies, that there's a hint of autobiographical intent here. Not saying that Ittenbach was a heroin addict, but he was probably a punk kid who fought with his parents and felt really like lost in himself, and probably had all these images. I mean, this kind of shit I would draw in my in my journal, or not journal, but like if I was in high school and I was in a lecture, I would just get bored and start drawing really gross stuff.
Yeah.
He's created a 3D version of that.
I've got very good at drawing hearts, like just people splitting in half and their hearts flying out. Like, oh yeah, and then this valve goes here, and this. I had like my own little cartoon version of what a heart looked like to me. Because so like this is that, except it's real. Like it doesn't feel like a doodle. It feels like a guy who's really fucking good at special effects.
Yeah, I mean it's at least as good as a lot of the stuff you'd see in like big movies in '92. Yeah. I mean, we're still on the cusp of digital, and I suppose I shouldn't say that. You could do like full animatronics, but as far as gore movies go, Dead Alive being a good example. Dead Alive has way more special effects, and some of them are better, but other ones aren't more convincing than this.
Yeah, and certainly the tone is much different. But I don't know, Burning Moon. I mean, it's like it's one of those things where it's like it's sort of we talked about Suffer Little Children, where the last 12 minutes are worth the rest of it and worth its reputation. And I feel that way about this movie, where it's like, I would not necessarily recommend this to people as like, this is an all-time classic horror movie you need to see. But like, if someone asked me specifically, what's the goriest movie I've ever seen? This is certainly in the running.
Well, and it also is fake. It's clearly fake. It's hell. And a lot of the goriest horror movies ever made, like the really shocking stuff, it makes you more uncomfortable.
Yeah,
because
that's
it's
a
stuff
good point.
like The Man Behind the Sun. The Man Behind the Sun is based on things that really happened and has footage from an actual child autopsy in it. It's not something you want to see. You only watch it to be shocked. This feels like an easier way to watch it and be grossed out without knowing that no one was hurt, no animals were killed.
Right, yeah.
Like that.
Knowing, like, this and Black Past both like to couch their gore in dream sequences and stuff, and it has just that fantasy disconnect that allows you to go, okay, I can just sort of cackle with glee at just how good and how many and how fast and furious all of these special effects are coming. Whereas but without it being a cartoon, without it being Dead Alive, while it's still nihilistic, it's like the kind of nihilism you can appreciate. You could be like, yes, I've definitely been there. I've definitely felt this. I know where this is coming from.
It feels like a heavy metal music video, especially when music videos started to go to digital only. They started, like, there's an Anthrax video that from not too long ago that's just a torturer taking a guy apart. And it was just, you were allowed to get away with that because you just put it straight on YouTube and put a warning on it.
Well, there was that infamous
kind of,
Nine Inch Nails music video from, I want to say, early 90s.
Oh, fuck yeah. Oh, well, I don't remember what song that was.
Was it
for.
Wish?
That was yeah, maybe. The guy just gets ground up. Ugh. Yeah, it's very similar to that, actually.
So, like, this is... Yeah. I clearly think that Nine Inch Nails, when they made that video, were looking at the German splatter films like this and, Necromantic.
Right.
So that's Burning Moon. Scary Tales from 1993, directed by Doug Ulrich. I want to say, at this point in our list, we're probably missing more and more. It's getting less and less comprehensive. I don't believe that only 2 shot-on-video horror movies from 1993 exist, but that's what we have on our list, so...
it was hard to see, because now you start to have digital video.
Right.
Really early digital video. So it's really hard to say.
So Scary Tales is another anthology film. This one is very traditional, and I think pretty well done. It's from Baltimore, which, again, you want that regionalism. Anyone who's seen The Wire has a certain fondness for the Baltimore accent, I think. And God, I just fucking love all the people in this movie and their crazy ass Baltimore accents. A lot of the effects and gags and stuff are just lifted straight from other movies. We have the Mrs. Voorhees decapitation from the end of Friday the 13th. We have I can't remember the other specifics off the top of my head, but the whole second sequence is just a guy going on a rampage, and I'm sure most of those gags are lifted from other things.
And I actually really enjoyed that second sequence.
Yeah.
Like, guy just going on a rampage, killing people, and it's pretty over the top, but sort of funny.
The thing about this movie is it's very well paced. It's 3 stories. Each of the story has a beginning, middle, and end. And they're goofy, but they know how to be just real enough that you can have the bare minimum investment in the characters. Like the third segment's definitely the goofiest. I think even there's like a tonal variety, which a lot of these anthology films don't have. But like when you think about Creepshow, the thing that makes Creepshow great is that the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill is balanced out by they're creeping up on you. Like those are two very different segments that nonetheless feel of a piece. And the thing that makes Creepshow work as a whole is that it has all these different tones and different kinds of stories in it. And I think that most of these anthology horror films, because they're so like, it's just such a miracle they got made at all. They don't really have that range. Maybe Terror Eyes has that range, but again, I think that's just because that was a bunch of short films pieced together after the fact. But I thought this movie did a good job of feeling like of a piece while still being each story has its own identity.
I actually kind of like the idea behind the third story. It's about an adult man whose life is ruined because he's obsessed with beating a video game, which is sort of ahead of its time, maybe.
Yeah. And he's playing like one of the early Ultima games, which were like early computer RPGs that would later become the World of Warcraft that, you know, people did get obsessed with and people have actually died playing.
Yeah. Or lost their jobs and all sorts of stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't actually ruin his life in the end, but still. It's actually very similar to a movie called The Dungeon Master that was a full moon anthology that is Richard Mall. I can't remember who the lead is, but Richard Moll's an evil wizard who tosses a guy into a basically Dungeons and Dragons video game, and he has to battle 3 different storylines. That's a little bit better and has a little bit bigger. It has a full moon budget instead of a absolutely no money budget.
The other fun thing about this movie is the framing device is this unholy grim creature narrating these stories to a bunch of children. And it looks like it's shot in a garage or something. It's this extremely long shot. I think it's a Grim Reaper puppet, not a person, but it has this crazy, deep, creepy ass voice, and all these little kids are just like, "Come on, we want to hear another story." Like it's a kids movie.
Yeah, it's like one of their dads or something.
Yeah. It's like one of those things that would be like something you would think about in like a creepypasta or something, where it's like, yeah, it was a kid's show, but it was really messed up and dark.
Yeah.
It has that kind of feel to it, which is fun. So anyway, the stories are, the first one, guy with a metal detector finds a necklace that unleashes a demon in him, and he has nightmares about being a demon, and then eventually he is a demon, and he kills his wife and his best friend. Second story, a guy finds out his wife's cheating on him, and he kills her and her lover, and then he just kind of goes on a generalized rampage.
Like, if it would have ended at him killing, I would have actually hated that one. But the fact that he just decides, oh, I'm going to go out, I better go out with a bang, and just wanders around town.
Just encountering people and killing them, it's like very clearly just like, all right, what if we come up with 6 ways to kill people, and then we just string those together. In a way that's very endearing. And then the final one is the story we told of the guy getting obsessed with a video game, and then he gets sucked inside, and I love that the sort of pastoral fantasy world just clearly feels like the outskirts of Baltimore. Like it does not feel like a rich, lush land. No. It looks like if you just turn the camera 180 degrees, you would see a parking lot.
Yeah. It's not even a nice park. It's a kind of crappy park.
That one's kind of goofy, but it's still fun. I like this. This is goofy fun. This is like good, clean fun in a way that you almost never get from shot on video. Yeah. Like shot on video, it's either like, what the fuck were they thinking? Or it's boring, or it's like the grossest thing you've ever seen in your life.
You got all muffled for a second there.
I guess I recorded okay, so that's okay.
Oh, okay.
Next is Savage Vengeance from 1993, directed by Donald Farmer. This is an unofficial sequel / remake of I Spit on Your Grave, starring the lead actress from I Spit on Your Grave, except that she hated Donald Farmer and she hated this whole process, so she ended up walking before they were finished.
Yeah.
And then to top it off for his trouble, he got threatened with lawsuits. So, by all accounts, this is a scuzzy and not very good movie.
Yeah. I believe it was one that I talked about in part 1, that this and his other movie were re-released with like I Spit on Your Corpse or something like that. They retitled them and made the cover art look like I Spit on Your Grave. So it was like they were like, yeah, it got
So just shameless.
Yeah, exactly.
Next one, Vampires and Other Stereotypes by Kevin J. Lindemuth. This is a pretty well-regarded movie. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to see it, but it's about a paranormal investigator. He gets a tip that there's sort of this supernatural activity happening in a warehouse where teens are having a party. Demons accidentally get summoned, and there's this sort of special effects bonanza as they battle the demons. Apparently, it's got really fun puppet effects. There's one of the demons is sort of like Beetlejuice. It sounds like a fun movie. And one of the things I heard about it is that it keeps sort of switching up what it's doing, and it keeps sort of things fresh by sort of changing its approach. So one of these days, Vampires and Other Stereotypes. Last movie we're going to be talking about, saved the best for last, in my opinion.
Yeah, and in a weird way, it just happened to be that way. When we did the 1981 movies, I think we ended on a stinker. It was an anticlimax.
But I am so excited to talk about Shatter Dead from 1994, directed by Scooter McCrae. Shatter Dead is a post-apocalyptic zombie movie, but its conception of zombies is very different. They're not sort of mindless flesh-eating ghouls. They are just sort of they're just sort of decomposing. They just like everything is worse. They're still alive. They're still able to walk around and talk. It's just life fucking sucks now.
Yeah.
Because their brains and their bodies are sort of separated in a way, and they just it's like it almost feels like a metaphor for like a depression or something like that.
For sure.
And it's about this woman who is sort of traveling across this landscape. She's just this like ruthless badass, toting a gun, sort of mercilessly killing people who threaten her. And the interesting thing about this movie is because it's shot on video and it's low budget, there's all these little story beats and there's all these little world building characters that pop up, and you think that it's like, okay, so this is going to be a movie about this one zombie cult, and then this is like, oh no, it's going to be a movie about this sort of thing. But really, like, all of those things, all of those characters, all of those subplots, they only exist. Like, it opens on a scene of a woman having sex with an angel who's the angel is a woman as well. And like all of these little subplots only exist to sort of add thematic flavor to everything, and like it's sort of built out the world, but it's not particularly interested in creating a realistic sort of post-apocalypse. It's more about the mood and the atmosphere and the feeling. And the thing about this movie for me is, again, this is sort of like McPherson tapes. I don't know how I would respond to this if I saw this a couple years ago, but I saw it this year, and there is something about the concept of apocalypse movies, about post-apocalypse movies, about post-apocalyptic fiction that I've been thinking about a lot about lately, just because, we're currently staring down, like especially the early days of COVID when it wasn't exactly clear how it was spread or what the death rates were or what the lasting effects of it would be. It was a very scary time where you're really starting to have big existential thoughts about the world. And the thing about it is that a zombie apocalypse where where no one dies and everyone is just alive, it's just terrible now, and they're just it really feels like, okay, so a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction is basically Mad Max fiction.
It's survival. It's about the manliness of surviving.
Right. It's this fantasy. It's like you are so rugged and you're such a tough individual. You are the last cowboy. You're the cowboy who shoots all the dirty punks, and they don't understand that you're just the best cowboy. And like, in a world where everything collapses, you will keep together your close nuclear family unit because you're the man, and so you protect your wife and your kids or whatever. Like, there's just, especially like Walking Dead being like one of the biggest shows ever. Like, we've talked about, I think, on several different episodes that we've podcasted together about like the toxicity of The Walking Dead and just like the gross conservative masculine fantasy that show is.
Right.
And I think the apocalypse is happening now. Like, I feel like as I live through this, I am seeing in slow motion, and this is something I've felt not just from 2020, not just from COVID for a while now, but it's just the feeling of like, oh, this is what it's going to be like. There won't be a day we wake up and then all of a sudden we're all on our own and running around. Like, we're all just going to keep doing this, and then and it will just slowly get less and less tenable for certain people. And then those people will have to deal with it on their own because there will be nothing around them.
Yeah.
Built up by government or whatever to support them. And I feel like Shatter Dead is a movie that is post-apocalyptic in a way that most other, like, no other movies deserve to be called post-apocalyptic because I feel like we are now like touching the hem of the apocalypse, and we now know that all of those other movies are bullshit. Yeah. And like, they could be fun bullshit. Like, I could watch The Road Warrior and go like, fucking A, but they're false. They are not real. That is not what is happening. That won't be what happens.
And it's hard to put a mundane, slow death of humanity to film. So
right, especially genre film.
Yeah, and it makes sense that it would have to be a super independent movie like this one that could do it.
But the crazy thing about this movie is what it does by having all these intersecting subplots and all these other characters. It creates that by having a character who's just moving perpendicular to all of these things, like all these other potential post-apocalyptic movies that they could be a part of, they instead are just sort of dipping in and out of. Mm-hmm. And so it gets that ambivalence, and it gets that feeling of no forward motion, and it gets that frustration while still being a movie where stuff is constantly happening and it's exciting, and it's not a movie that's like too cool to be gory. Like, there are moments in this there's trauma ass gore in it.
Yeah.
But it's just recontextualized to mean something different. But like, it's not too cool to be a horror movie. It's not too cool to be a zombie movie. It's not too cool to have all of the weird stuff that those movies have in terms of the weird characters and it's just like, it just frames it differently. It's not trying to make you feel pleasure from these things.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, it's like just amazingly shot. It's just so well lit and shot, and just what it looks like. There's early on when that sort of punk group like assaults the home that she's staying in, and there's like a gunshot through the door.
Yeah. And
then like you just see her through the hole in the door. It's like, it's the kind of stuff you never see in shot-on-video movies. It's absolutely astonishing.
That shot was the video box originally. I don't like this new.
No, it's bad.
Yeah.
It's like, I guess it's like, must be like a DVD cover or something, but it's like a very photoshopped, like zombies reaching towards the viewer.
Yeah.
Whereas that like shot with all of its negative space is like, that's the movie. And as she's trying to get home to her boyfriend, and then by the time she gets there, he's committed suicide and he's a zombie now. And they are still trying to make it work. There's still this sense of denial. There's still this sense of like there's this long sex scene there's a lot of sex in this movie as well, which is like, like none of these movies, like in general, I think this is not something that only low budget movies have a problem with. I think in general, most movies don't know what to do with sex. Yeah. They feel that they need to have it and it needs to exist, but very, very few sex scenes I've ever seen in my life actually feel like they're getting something across about the characters. They just feel like a pause before the next scene that actually matters. All of the sex in this, all of the nudity in this feels like really important. It feels like it's like there's a shot of her showering, but it's like through this veil that you can like only kind of see her body, and there's like all of these like sort of thwarted frustrations, and there's this sense of like people keep reaching out and trying to feel good and feel pleasure and to be like it was, but it can't. And I feel like almost that the sex in this movie is about it's about denying you pleasure by getting you excited about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and it's also a little more graphic than you'd see in, even the more violent of these movies.
I don't know if it's unsimulated, but there is a scene where she ties her boyfriend's, because his blood doesn't flow anymore, so he can't get an erection. So she ties his penis to a gun and then has sex with it. It's like it's the kind of scene that if you saw it in a David Cronenberg movie, you'd be like, this is the image in the David Cronenberg movie that I'll always remember.
Yeah.
It's the scene. I feel like there's a similar shot in Crash, where it's just like, this image is so messed up. This is going to be the thing that I always associate with this movie.
Yeah.
Except even more so. Like, I think it's even more effective than Crash, which is a movie I think is great. But the idea that no one dies in this world, they just become zombies, and being a zombie just means your life fucking sucks now.
Yeah.
Is so fascinating, because it means that there is no false finality. It's just everything is constantly happening and still happening. And that to me is the overwhelming feeling I have in 2020, or the feeling I have of just whatever collective trauma we are all experiencing right now, is that there is no relief from it. It's just constantly churning in the background. I love the woman who has sex with the angel in the very first scene in the movie. She gets pregnant, and then she gets shot in the stomach, but with a shotgun. But because this world no one dies, her fetus is still alive. So there's like a scene where she goes into the shower and tries to wash off the fetus and tries to breastfeed it. And it's like, it's this crazy mockery of this mothering image. This movie is it's not a long movie, but it's absolutely rotten with just totally amazing images and scenes like that. And it's just so, especially, it's called Shatter Dead, and again, the poster is like what you said. The new poster is this photoshopped zombies reaching out, and I heard this one's a little more artsy, this one's kind of it's kind of depressed, and I go, okay, cool, so it's a zombie movie that maybe has something on its mind or whatever. The expectations were just, my ass was totally blown off my body when I saw this movie. I just could not believe what I was seeing. This movie's so fucking good. I can't wait to watch Scooter McCrae's other movies. Sadly, he hasn't done too many more, but he does have a movie. I forget the name of it now, but I've read enough about it to know it's a very similar thing with very similar thematic concerns in terms of sort of sex and pleasure. I mean, clearly he's more of an art filmmaker. He's more of an experimental filmmaker who sort of dipped into the genre space. But the thing about this movie that I love is it's not ashamed to be a genre movie. Mm-hmm. Despite that.
Well,
one of the things I kept thinking about when I was watching this movie is, what would the modern day A24 version of this movie be?
Yeah. Yeah.
And every version of it I thought of was just I just fucking suck. That would be terrible, because it would be so self-serious. It would be the one funny thing as watching this now and then thinking about A24 movies and everything is, I think one of the things about the pendulum swinging in terms of let's make horror movies about women, let's make horror movies about the psychological reality of being a woman, let's make horror movies with strong women characters, is I think that these movies have gotten really afraid of sex, because they're just someone could see this and think that because there's nudity in it, then we're being exploitative in some way. So let's not even broach the subject. Let's just stay away. Or let's if there is nudity, it's weird old people nudity in Hereditary or Midsummer or whatever. And I feel like a lot of these movies now are if we depict sex at all, we have to depict it as inherently demeaning and upsetting,
gross.
And this is a movie. This movie exists in a world where sex was pleasurable once, and possibly could be for some. It just can't be for these characters. And it's it's funny because it's 1994. It's not responding to any of the things that I'm thinking of. But it's funny going back to this era. I guess this era doesn't even apply, because the 90s were the post-AIDS crisis. Things were very afraid of depicting sex, frankly.
Since we're already at the point where I'm making this 4 parts, I will give context, because I saw this in high school, and it really it has that effect of that like grunge era suicide as a sort of scary, the idea of suicide being scary but also attainable, like Kurt Cobain kills himself so now everybody talks about suicide, was really a thing so I probably saw this in 95 or 96. But so to me, this was something I watched, and I said to myself that this was like the this is what I could do if my friends and I got together and really thought it through. Like, we could make a movie this good with just a camcorder and some VCRs and some friends, because it can't be mistaken for a theatrical release,
right?
But it's smart, and it's the all caps big idea movie, which is something that makes a big difference with a low budget anything. Is if you have an idea and you have a theme behind it, it really makes a difference. So I rewatched it as an adult, and it does have that sort of teen angst quality that doesn't speak to me anymore. But at the time, it felt like genuinely dangerous, because it really did feel like it was about suicide to me.
Yeah.
And the dangers of fetishizing suicide, and how, like, if you like, this is where you end up, kind of thing. And then the other context of this time is we didn't have, Dawn of the Dead remake and The Walking Dead, and just there weren't millions and millions of zombie movies. It was really the stuff we've been covering here in the early 90s. You had that stuff. You had Return of the Living Dead 3. You had the Night of the Living Dead remake. You had Dead Alive, Brain Dead. And if you were lucky, you could find Cemetery Man at some video stores. But really, we had to go back and watch 80s and 70s movies to watch zombie movies. So even if this was treating zombies differently, it still felt really important that someone was still keeping zombie movies alive. And it's interesting looking back that it still feels fresh after this glut of zombie movies. Like, we've had, I can't remember what it's called. There's the French film, They Returned, or about zombies that come back and they're not flesh eaters, but it just unhinges society because nobody knows where to put them because they want their old jobs back and stuff. There are all sorts of really high concept zombie movies that have been released, and this one still somehow feels like an original story. And the closest thing I could think of was sometime in the 90s, George Romero tried to get funding for a fourth Dead movie that I think was called Twilight of the Dead. And when interviewed about it, he said his idea was that the world had moved on from zombies because they were rotting too much to be dangerous, and they were basically treated like the homeless. And there's a lot of actual homeless people in this movie who are living dead homeless people. And so I don't necessarily think Scooter McCrae was even aware of that. He might have been, since it was a Fangoria thing. But despite no one getting eaten, this almost feels like the Romero movie from the 90s that never happened. And,
yeah.
And I don't mean, I'm not saying that lightly. I'm a pretty big George Romero fan, and I take his zombie movies up to a certain point pretty seriously. And I think Land of the Dead is the perfect George Romero movie for the early 2000s, but we never really got one in the 90s. And I think Day of the Dead is the perfect... Day of the Dead is similar, that it's depressing, and it's about how all the tough guys don't make a difference. And everybody hated that when it came out. And so this feels...
No, I was hearing your description of being like, yeah, no wonder he didn't get funding for Twilight of the Dead.
Yeah, nobody... I mean, he couldn't get it. Yeah, nobody wanted to do it. And it really... And so it was just kind of luck that zombie movies went into vogue and he got to make Land of the Dead, even if it was compromised. So I do think that I'm happy to rewatch Shatter Dead. I haven't seen it in forever, and see that it's still, again, I feel like I've aged out of it a little bit, because I don't feel like the people in the movie anymore. Not that I was a depressed kid, but I was angsty about shit.
No, that's fair.
But the fact that it can still feel like a really original and thematically interesting zombie movie is really important, I think.
I also like hearing you describe it in terms of grunge and Kurt Cobain and stuff makes me realize that structurally this almost feels like the suicide fetish version of Slacker.
Yeah, kind of. They even have the clothing everybody's wearing. She's got she walks around with the quintessential grunge outfit for a lot of the movie. Yeah.
So there was part of this that felt like Slacker. There's part of this that it's just like all of these people are just sort of coping in their own weird ways, and you're sort of drifting in and out of their lives, and there's these incomplete stories going on. Like that whole the woman has the angel's baby. Like, what is that? What is happening there?
My reading was that is why there's no more death, because a demon and maybe a fallen angel or something have had sex, and they've that was the instigating thing. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't it could have just been an image that they liked.
I mean, it keeps popping up in the dream sequences as well. That nude angel sort of beckoning to her.
Yeah, it's like the angel did it was so blasphemous that God gave up on everybody. Wouldn't let anybody into heaven or hell.
Oh man, I love this is definitely the discovery for me, and also just I just think about it. I'm like, I don't know. It's hard for me. It's hard for me to think about this outside of this year. It's hard for me to take this in a context that it was actually made in. Mm-hmm. It's and it's it means a lot to me now in a way that it probably wouldn't have. Well, then is 1994. I would have been 7, but it's an important movie for me to have seen this year. In a year where I'm not watching any new movies, really, it's nice to find old movies like McPherson Tape and Shatter Dead that still sort of speak to what's happening around me. I watched Hiroshima Mon Amour recently. That movie really takes on a different...
Yeah, man. Maybe the next time I'll do a whole episode about movies that felt different when they were rewatched in 2020. Kept on happening. Kept on happening. You don't realize how many fucking viral outbreaks there are in movies and video games and books and comics until you're in one and you're like, fuck, I can't escape it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I mean, just crowd scenes. Like, there's if a movie is realistic enough for me to stop to break down the sort of fictional construct, and I'm just sort of watching it as if it's actually happening, I will always have a moment where I go, oh God, well, they're none of them wearing their... Oh, that's right. This is made in 1991. Like, cool down.
I watched a documentary about Wacken Heavy Metal Festival from 2018, and I actually got almost a panic attack from all the shirtless, maskless people dancing and screaming next to each other.
On that note,
since this is the end, and since, like I said, we've gone to the point where I'm going to make this 4 episodes. I think I'm going to really milk this. So I'll probably go through January, and then I'll be something new come. What are the ones that were what are your top 3, top 4 here? What are the ones that people have to see? Top 5 even.
Let's see. For me, it's got to be. You know what?
I'll say mine. List. I'm looking at it now.
All right.
I'll say of ones I actually enjoyed was Suffer Little Children. I actually kind of enjoyed Ripper, but I don't think I would count that. Cards of Death, I'd really recommend people see. I liked Video Violence a lot more than I remembered liking it. And Night Feeder, I really hope gets some sort of release, and that they include the CD-ROM thing in the Blu-ray or whatever. And The Burning Moon was good to revisit, and Shatter Dead was great to revisit.
For me, I would say Shatter Dead for sure. Possibly in Michigan, though that's a movie because it's only 12 minutes long. I watch that maybe twice a year since 2015. So that's no discovery there. I just love Possibly in Michigan. The McPherson Tape for sure, and then the Polonia Brothers, Splatter Farm and Hallucinations.
Yeah.
I love dipping into those idiots' lives.
Yeah.
And Dark Romances Volume 1 for sure as well.
Well, I'll make sure to watch Dark Romance and McPherson Tapes since they're both on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I can know what you're talking about. So I guess that's the end, guys. Thanks for hanging in there. But there's just, we can only talk about this for so long before we literally die. So I'm going to say goodbye. You can find Patrick on Tracks of the Damned. And sometimes on, what's the deal with Directors Club these days? Are you still doing occasional episodes?
Yeah, occasionally I'll be on there.
If this goes up at the end of January, what do you think will be ready for people?
What you should check out is the episode of Directors Club that me and Jim did in January, because we normally do a year-end 2020 episode, but obviously this year is kind of a mulligan. We're kind of kicking it to the curb. I saw maybe 4 2020 movies. And instead, we've decided to do a sort of a weird draft game where we are going to collectively decide what the top 10 films of the Obama era is. Since we're all going to be living through the nightmare of neoliberalism once more. We're going to look at the rose-colored glasses that we used to have, because we were just so happy not to be under Bush anymore.
Yeah.
That we were just like, well, can we just turn off our brains for a little bit, please? And we're going to look at the films of the Obama era, and we're going to make a top 10 list.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. And you're making a mixtape version.
Yeah, by the time this goes up, people should already have a chance to check out my mix. I'm gonna try to include at least clips from as many movies as I can, including all the best music from these movies that I can get a hold of. And if you want to just vibe out to SOV sort of tones, then that mixtape's going to be a pretty cool way to do that.
Sorry this took 4 episodes, but hopefully it was all good. You can find me at the Genre Grinder website, at Genre Grinder on Twitter, at Gabe M as in Matthew Powers on Twitter, and the Genre Grinder Facebook page. Thanks for listening. Wear your mask. Black Lives Matter. Social distance. Be safe. Goodbye.
Bye.
Acid, would you help me? Or would you just think that I possess no class? Oh, darling, please tell me now, 'cause the lights are getting dim. Oh, baby dumpling, why can't I want